He's had a new album in the last couple of years called Plaisance. It is brilliant. True to You in particular is just phenomenal. We've got to talk about all these things. But the Equals, the 80s music, Ring Bang, Nelson Mandela, being 71. I've got to ask you, Eddie Grant, the music from the 60s to now, which is the best era for music?
Would have to say in terms of songwriting, the 60s, because it encompassed the Beatles, who Lennon and McCartney were phenomenal songwriters, which is the reason that their songs have been sung thousands and thousands of times or millions of times by other people. Apart from that, a lot of what came along with it was also quite brilliant. From the American side, you had Stevie Wonder, and of course the Gamble and Huffs and the Coffin and Kings and all of these people. So the transiting from the 50s, where they had the great old songwriters, the Beatles picked up on some of that skill that was around at the time. And Smokey Robinson, of course, they would have done some of his stuff, and Chuck Berry. So you had a lot of great material in the 60s.
And wasn't Chuck Berry one of your great influences?
He was the first out of America, certainly. I mean, the Mighty Sparrow was out of the Caribbean. But once I'd gotten to England, Chuck Berry was definitely one of the pillars, the Eddie Grant that was going to become Eddie Grant in the future.
Do you know when you hear those notes, doom, 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 it is absolutely iconic. Going back to the days of the Equals, how groundbreaking was that for you back in those days in the 60s?
The Equals was groundbreaking in many respects. For me, for England, for the world. I mean, there hadn't been a band like it, and they're still trying, to decipher what really took place. It was sociological, it was political, it was just great fun. And remember, I was a very young boy at the time, so it was like nothing that I would have experienced or even hoped to experience in my lifetime.
At the age of 23, Eddie, you had a heart attack. How did that change your life? Because that meant really the end of the Equals for you shortly after, didn't it?
Well, any heart issues becomes a life-changing issue. And throughout my life, it's continued. It is just that I look after myself and keep my body in good trim, that it hasn't taken me out. I mean, it's taken out a lot of people I know, friends of mine, and so on. To have had that at 23, it just established for me a mode of conduct so that I could not come off the rail. And it enabled me to focus very strongly on the things that I wanted to do and achieve. I certainly didn't want to achieve solo success. It was not part of my plan. But then, as I said, when you've had something like that, then for the good of yourself and the good of other people, you've got to make serious decisions. And one of the decisions was that I couldn't continue in the mode that I was at that time. Well, it's just one of those things that happened.
On the line from Barbados, we've not even touched on the 80s yet. We've not touched on his new stuff, which if you haven't downloaded it, is brilliant. A couple of years ago, you brought out an album which took you right back to your roots. It was 14 songs. They're out there right now. I cannot switch off True to You. I am obsessed with it.
You blow my mind and I'm gonna be true to you. Though I'm hurt inside, now I know you could do it.
How did that come about? I love it. It's so catchy.
The story of Plaisance, my story in Plaisance, it goes from about the age of 8 and a half to 12. And it's a very interesting for me time, because I recognize that so much of my life was formed unnaturally, so probably, because at age 8 you are supposed to be an idiot or not very smart or a child, At age 8.5, I was not a child. I'd already seen so much of life and experienced so much at the hands of older people, older guys, older women who showed me another way, who showed me how I can be more of me and less of other people. And by the time I come to England, I was already a fully formed human, fully formed in every manner almost. My skills, my education, all came together. By the time I was 12 years old, I was ready for the world. So Plaisance is really a document that can be expanded or will be expanded in time, God giving me life, into a visual, audiovisual issue.
Do you think if something like True to You had come out, say, in the 80s, that'd be a mega hit, a monster right around the world?
No, I think that True to You would be a hit at any time, given the exposure. All of my hits have been through my little Ice Records label. Those things that you see that they say are independent are not. They're ably aided by major company funding, all kinds of knickknacks happen. And so you get hits, but they're not real hits. They're selling a couple of records here and there. People who used to sell millions are now selling thousands. And they kid you because, people go up on the internet and they see that there has been, somebody's got 200 million hits. It don't mean anything. All it means is that they've had 200 people pressing, or maybe not even 200, some machine pressing 200 million times. It doesn't mean that you've sold many records. The people who sold records up to the 80s sold records and presumably got the benefits of it. Today, the story is quite different. So I always ask the people who like my music to not be shy. Go ahead. It's online. It's on eddygrant.com. And you can download it just like you can download it on Apple or Spotify or whatever it is. If you want Eddy Grant is at eddygrant.com. Simple. I don't have to go through 3 or 4 or 5 people so that you can hear the music that I'm making and read my story.
Well, I do want Eddy Grant, and I've been on eddygrant.com, and it's good. And what you can't avoid is the music of the 80s, of course, which is where you presumably made a lot of your commercial success. How big now do those songs like Electric Avenue and I Don't Want to Dance and, of course, Give Me Hope, Joanna, how big are they in terms of your memory of your music? Is that a peak for you?
I've had many peaks, as you know. I've been there peaking away in the 60s. I've been peaking away in the 70s. I've been peaking away in the 80s. And I was peaking away in the 90s. So it's just a question of when my audience is allowed to hear me. Today, people are still playing Baby Come Back. They will not be playing it if it was no good.
And what's your personal highlight? 71 years, still in the music business and still loving producing the music. What's your personal highlight? If you could only pick one, how on earth do you do it?
I can't pick one song. It would be like asking you to pick one of your children. It's each one of them represents a sector of my life and my experience. A man is some total of his experiences. And each one of those songs, a song never makes the Eddy Grant album if it's no good. In other words, I am that good at choosing my songs. I spend a lot of time with it. It's like Quincy Jones says, how can you get it wrong when you have written or had to choose from 800 songs? You'd have to be a pretty bad judge to end up with a bad album. which of course was Thriller.
And finally, who's inspired you the most? I'm thinking back to the days of Give Me Hope, Joanna, banned by the South African government, and your appearance at the Nelson Mandela stuff. Am I guessing someone like Nelson Mandela is one of your biggest inspirations?
Well, there have been many. And again, it's like the songs. I have had many people who've inspired me. Muhammad Ali is one. I mean, they're not perfect. None of them are perfect people. The great Nelson Mandela, obviously. I've had other people who are great in their own right. I mean, we talk about Chuck Berry, we talk about James Brown. Possibly across my career, James Brown has affected me a lot as an artist because he was perfection. Chuck Berry, I mean, again, they're not perfect, but as John Lennon said, if you're going to call rock and roll by any other name, you might as well call it Chuck Berry. So I have had many across the period of my life that I really look up to and continue to look up to.
Well, they might be your inspirations, but you are an inspiration to many people and many generations, from the Equals through to the hit-making machine of the 80s and Plaisance and everything that you can get at eddygrant.com right now. Go and find his music online because it is worth listening to, still to this very day, producing some great tunes. My thanks on the line from Barbados to Eddy Grant.
Thank you very much.
Electric Avenue.